a little bit more time just while we let people arrive. Transport issues from the upstairs of the house to the downstairs of the house or whatever. Maybe queuing on the stairs. Right, I think we're going to get started now because we've got half an hour and we're going to keep it nice and snappy. So welcome everyone to the Dragonfly AI event, Revving Up Your Marketing Engine. My name's Johnny Aldred, as you might have seen from my screen there, and I'm from Performance Marketing World. And today we've got the pleasure of speaking with GM Marketing and Comms Director Katie Dulake. And Katie's got over 20 years of experience with branding and marketing. And she's been responsible for defining and driving the strategic marketing direction of some recognizable brands, including Mitsubishi Motors, the British Army, and TSB Bank. So Katie, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you here. And over the next 20 minutes, we'll be spending some time discussing and sharing lessons from some winning campaigns. And then we'll end the session with a bit of a Q&A. So if you've got any questions, just jot them down in the chat there, and we'll get to them afterwards and we'll answer them all at the end. And just so you know, the event's being recorded, so we'll be able to share that with you afterwards with anybody who's here and wants a copy. You'll be able to get hold of one. So let's kick off. Katie, first question. How has the pandemic impacted your approach to marketing?
Well, crikey, it seems a long time ago now. And of course, if I think back to lockdown, you think of it as being this kind of never-ending, long, permanent lockdown. But of course, it was actually a really, really changeable situation. And I think one of the first things we had to do was develop a lot of contingency plans. So whereas normally we'd be very well organised, have a really clear strategy and a plan approached in lots of good time, this time we had to adapt and we had to have different options. And that was really important because we had dealer showrooms opening and closing. We had different COVID conditions applying at different times to different parts of the UK. So it was actually a situation that was changing all the time. And that really affected our choice of media. And part of that was about timelines. At one point early on, for example, we decided to pull an out-of-home element to our campaign, and we gambled a little bit on booking TV. But generally, we didn't really want to commit a large proportion of our budget if we didn't have to. So, of course, that pushes you down a largely digital route, because that would let us make our decisions much later. I mean, with hindsight, it probably drove our media agency up the wall because we were just planning and replanning, a lot. In terms of that focus on digital, we had to make sure that everything was working as hard as possible. Apart from an early stint of above the line in that first summer, we were completely reliant on our digital channels. Especially as the usual awareness raising activities that we'd have to that we'd normally go with, such as our rugby partnerships, were a non-event with the COVID lockdown. So we had to optimise and make everything work as hard as possible. And I think from a messaging perspective, there was a really big focus away from the dealer showrooms, which was really unusual for us. In automotive, it's all about driving traffic over to your dealer network, and the big metric for us was always on test drives, which again, of course, we couldn't push. Test drives weren't possible, so we actually had to work on a completely new call to action. It was all about just getting in touch. We had to look at the whole customer journey and think about whether it made sense anymore. Everything from unstitching, CRM emails to looking at the website and really pulling that apart. So that was a really big focus for us. And I guess, like many others, we had this really big push on our digital capabilities. We were inviting people to kind of come online, look at our configurators. We were focusing on our buy online, which was, you know, a new focus for us, and getting the business to agree to offer free delivery as well. So it was a very different period for us. In hindsight, it was quite exciting. And you know, really not what we'd expected.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it must have been quite a shock, just when everything just kind of stops like that. I mean, obviously we all experience that sort of a shock. But I wonder how that in other areas across marketing, you know, how that's driven some different trends, and what key trends are you seeing kind of emerging from that?
Well, of course, I think the first thing at the time, when we were really deep in lockdown, and as I say, they merged together, so I forget exactly when, but I guess it would have been summer 2020.
Not alone in that, I'm sure.
Exactly. Yeah. But it was really interesting to see everyone coming out with these really homespun adverts. You know, there's this kind of COVID blitz spirit, which was really interesting. And I suspect that's shown brands that you can make great content without necessarily having a lot of budget to spend. So I think there was a real opportunity for some really real innovation and creativity. I also suspect there's subsequently been a real rush back to the studio. And I think interesting to see all the Christmas ads, you know, this year, and everyone kind of ramping back up their production budgets again after a period of not being able to.
Well, I remember you talk about the homespun ads. I remember seeing Jamie Oliver struggling away at home with his family around him. It's funny to think of it now that, but we really were kind of completely hamstrung, weren't we? I think.
Yeah, and it quite quickly became really, really normal. And I think there was something really interesting about that. You know, it remains to be seen how much of that stays, but I do think it's kind of heralded, it's showing what can be done, for sure. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if I'm a sort of watcher of Sunday brunch occasionally, and I know that it's one of those things where they have now far more of those kind of live links, you know, like we're doing now. You know, we probably wouldn't have done this before lockdown had this chat. We wouldn't have all these people online sort of sitting here listening either. You know, it's kind of definitely are positives, I guess.
Yeah, I think so, for sure. I think in terms of kind of marketing efforts, I think a lot of brands have become much more intensely focused on performance marketing. And you know, you can see that in a lot of areas, really. Specifically, anyone looking for jobs at the moment is all about performance marketing roles. And I think that's a reflection of the fact that companies are a lot more risk averse post-COVID. So there's more of a need than ever to demonstrate, you know, a return on investment from every penny that's spent. Sorry, I hope you guys can't hear my spaniel. You probably can, but
I hadn't noticed till you mentioned it, but yeah.
Sorry. So I think and obviously it's much easier to show return on investment, to measure that when you're looking at direct and digital channels. So I think that's a really real trend that we've seen, you know, during and post COVID. And the last one, I mean, this is you know, just world according to me, but I feel that a lot of companies have really slowed down on their decision making. And I was talking to someone the other day, because my reading of that was just general, you know, a lack of certainty about, you know, what's going on in the economy, what recovery will look like. But I had an interesting conversation the other day with someone who felt it was due to circumstance, and that we've perhaps underestimated all those conversations that would normally take place, you know, at the water cooler, in the corridor, wherever. And that actually how much those conversations actually played in terms of influencing people and really kind of oiling the wheels of decision making and commerce. And his theory was, because we're not having those conversations anymore, people aren't getting the chance to kind of warm people up to new ideas or new directions. And so that kind of, decision-making process has really slowed down without it. I thought that was a really interesting read on that.
I wonder what will develop to sort of ameliorate that. It's funny, but I think I mentioned to you before that we go into like on the rare occasions I know that I go into an office, I'll kind of chat with somebody. I chatted with somebody I bumped into who I hadn't seen for ages, and we had this sort of a conversation, which is actually the much more interesting, memorable part of my trip to the office,
right?
And probably the more influential thing, because it kind of spins off things that you didn't already know were going to happen. Whereas in a meeting, you're following a sort of fixed agenda, and it's more like a box ticking exercise almost. I don't know.
Yeah,
I wonder what we'll come up with.
Exactly. And I think, at the moment that focus, and I think it's got a bit silly, the whole, are we back at work? Are we not back at work? But I think at the moment the focus has been on creativity and ways to kind of maintain that. But actually, I wonder if there's something a bit more, fundamental at play.
Yeah. I wonder if you can tell us what lessons you can share that have contributed to this. Bringing it back to your campaign again.
Yeah.
What in particular are the things that kind of really made the difference with that campaign that you did?
Well, it did transpire to be a really successful campaign, and I think there are a number of factors within that. Firstly, I think it's important that when budgets are, relatively low or constrained as they were for us in terms of, having to use digital channels, it's important that you convert as much as possible. And it was surprising, how even really small tweaks or improvements along the length of the funnel can make a real difference. So thinking about that whole customer journey, in other words, not just about the campaign, thinking about what happens to your traffic, where is it going when it gets onto your website. So, making sure that the campaign landing page is optimized and making sure that conversion is working as hard as possible.
So how do you talk about optimizing the landing page? Could you tell us a bit about how you did that with the AI?
A lot of testing. Great thing about the Dragonfly platform, which was one of our good decisions during this period, was that we could run through, rather than having to test things in the live environment and kind of learn by our response rates going down, we were able to quite quickly identify layouts and designs that were more likely to succeed. And by succeed, I mean to capture an audience's attention and get them to kind of move where we wanted to, which for us was this, get in touch and talk to us about how we can get you a test drive as soon as we possibly can. So that was a really positive element. The other way that we used Dragonfly, of course, was to test the messaging in our assets, in our digital assets that we put out. So that was really, really helpful for us as well. And again, it precluded that need to test in the live environment. So we just didn't have that period of, hedging while we wait to see what the most optimum result is. But there is an element of that, of course, but it meant that we were able to quite quickly get rid of any options that with hindsight would not have worked, that didn't test well.
That's interesting, because I kind of got the thing about how it saves you making mistakes that you didn't need to make, or at least make fewer mistakes, but also the thing about speeding things up, unblocking your decision making. I hadn't really kind of got that.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of ways that happened. The speeding it up bit was you don't have to wait for something to fail. You can tell it's not going to work to start with, but it did help with our decision making. Before, we wouldn't get stuck in this, and I don't want to over egg it, but when you make decisions about assets, there's a huge element of subjectivity that goes through that. And so occasionally, you'll get people saying, well, I really don't like how that works. The great thing about Dragonfly is it quite quickly makes some of that largely irrelevant, because you can see that some artwork is more effective than other artwork. So, for example, there was early on in the campaign, we'd positioned part of it to work. There were 3 elements to the offer, and we'd come up with, a really smart and very, aesthetically pleasing way of describing and presenting that offer. When we ran it through Dragonfly, it just didn't land. It was clear that it wasn't kind of going the way that we wanted. And normally we'd have gone with that because, aesthetically, it looked like the more pleasing creative presentation. It was clear that when we ran it through that, we wouldn't do that. So we decided to, we cut that and we just went with a different version. Again, that saved us a lot of time. We may never have realised that actually that creative wasn't optimal, in any other way. So it was incredibly helpful.
And do you think that kind of the creatives using this, I mean, presumably it's a matter of, rather than the creatives do their work, then you run it through Dragonfly and you tell them that they've got it all wrong. But rather than that, the creatives use it as a sort of support guide.
Absolutely.
So that they can sort of start to train themselves a little bit about how the eye works, or how the brain works, or...
Yeah, and there were some things that I think it would be very hard to anticipate, and actually the example I've just given is a good point. I think time and time again, from a creative aesthetic perspective, you choose the option that we'd chosen to start with, and it was only when you kind of go into that, you take the AI on board, that changes. But you're right. I mean, we made sure that our agency had access to a Dragonfly license so they could work with it themselves, because that wouldn't be a great creative process, having that discussion, time in, time out.
Well, it's funny you should say about giving you, in a way, the strength to go with your first best idea. I mean, I remember from my own dim, distant history, when I used to work on Loaded magazine once upon a time, I'd get frustrated because some of to be honest with you, there's one designer in particular who was brilliant but really lacked confidence. So he would come up with a brilliant idea, and then he'd sort of bin it and go all the way around the houses and do like 15 other things. And then you'd end up saying, well, look, what's wrong with the thing you did in the first place? And then 2 days later, you'd end up with the thing that he'd done in 20 minutes, Whereas if, as you say, if you have this kind of support that is not just me saying, oh, that looks like a good idea, there's some science behind it.
There is some science behind it, and that's absolutely right. So I think that would be, very helpful. And we were using it in, quite a tactical channel environment. But, what I haven't done is use that with, larger above the line campaigns, which would be really interesting as well. So, that would be an interesting thing to consider. And I do think, to your point, I think it's really important to remember to, this should be helping you to innovate, not kind of damping down on it. It's not designed to kind of remove debate or, to make you less innovative. So, for example, at the same time, we made sure that we invested in a really smart partnership with Luna Drive-In Cinema. And it's important to do that. And actually, in a way, our investing in Dragonfly was part of our innovation at this time as well. And I think, when times are tough, it's easy to just double down and just do what feels safe. But I think, there are big rewards if you resist that and do, innovate as well. Yeah.
Well, which brings me to my final question, really, which is how you say we're moving more and more to a world of performance marketing, which is great for us at Performance Marketing World, obviously. So how would you say you do measure success?
I think it depends on what you've been asked to do. It's really important we don't lose sight of what the business outcome that we're required to be achieving is. So I tend to view success, with an eye on both the campaign and what the campaign is doing. So all those campaign metrics, what's our click-through rate, how's everything performing, how's this channel performing, but with an eye on the business outcome. Why are we in this? What are we doing? What are we trying to do? And again, that was slightly tricky for us because normally the answer is drive test drives. We had to kind of really unpick that and be able to articulate what we were trying to achieve, which was basically to keep people in our funnel for longer, to the point where we could get them into a car for them to hopefully go on and purchase. I think from a campaign perspective, click-through rate is always interesting, and I think the key about this campaign was when we increased the Dragonfly effect with our increased templating, we saved about 87% of the creative costs we'd normally incur on a comparable campaign. So that was interesting. We also that kind of lent itself into return on investment, and we scored a really good level with this. So about 3 times, our level by the end was about 3 times higher the average automotive return on marketing investment, which is, you know, a great result and good for the business. Back to thinking about those business outcome objectives, though, the key thing was helped us exceed our revenue targets by about 17%. And I have no doubt that part of that was due to our, you know, our real focus on, you know, getting as much optimization out of that campaign as we possibly could. So week in, week out, looking at those figures, seeing what we could change, using the tools that we had to just continually refresh and optimize and work on that as we went through.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I think that's really most of the questions that I wanted to ask you. I'm just going to say, if there's anybody who's got any questions they want to put in the chat as well. But I'm just picking up one here. Yes, somebody said they'd read the case study in Performance Marketing World. And what would you say was the biggest insight that you gained from Dragonfly, from using the AI?
I wouldn't say there was one key insight. I think the most surprising moment was that example that I gave where we completely ended up, you know, taking a dealer campaign in a different creative direction. You know, it affected the layout and the way we were presenting that offer. So I think that was the biggest eye-opener for me. I think just, you know, where the results were so counter. I mean, I like to think, as I'm sure we all do, that we've kind of developed some element of creative judgment and, you know, skill even in this area, and yet to have a result that was so surprising. You know, if you go out with this, no one's going to look at your call to action at all. That was, you know, quite an eye opener for me.
And when you saw that, could you kind of understand? Oh, was it like a sort of scales falling from your eyes, sort of? Oh, I see. I understand why that would be.
Well, I think that's the clever. Not really. I think that's the really clever thing. You know, Dragonfly deals with so many different variables. You know, the positioning, the color. There's so many things you can tweak and change. And that's why it's so helpful in terms of kind of, you know, helping with those A/B testing matrices and, you know, working out what you're going to go with. It means you can kind of get some of the smaller stuff out of the way and then go, you know, test other things, because it doesn't stop you needing to test. You know, I'd still absolutely recommend that you test while you're in market. It just takes some of the early decision making out of the way and makes it, you know, sets the conditions for success, really.
Okay. Right, let's see another one. One example where you changed the campaign messaging, and it was clear that well, I think that's pretty much what we've said, wasn't it? So another one. How do you think Dragonfly helped with decision-making process?
Sped it up. So what, you know, rather than getting into an endless discussion about, you know, which layout do we prefer, where everyone has a view on it, we were given a really clear result. It didn't speed up the campaign, to be honest, because this particular creative, the one that we'd realised wasn't going to work, we had to rework, because we'd gone quite a way down the line on that one. So that actually incurred more time as we put it right. But overall, I think it made things much quicker and helps you think in a more structured way about what you're going to test and how you're going to test it, which I think is helpful. And again, speeds up and kind of strengthens that decision making.
Yeah, great. I don't know if we've got any more things in the chat. What I was going to say was, well, really, I'm just going to thank everybody for joining us today. It's been really great to see so many people come along. I hope you got something interesting from it. I want to say, if you want to, oh, so I'm just seeing my screen do something funny. Bear with me. There we go. Yeah, if you want to speak to the team at Dragonfly, there's the email address is there on the screen for you. So sales@dragonflyai.co. And a quick plug for performancemarketingworld.com as well. Don't forget to get yourselves on there. You can get a sort of daily bulletin as well, weekly bulletin at the moment. And lots of stories of interest, I hope, for you there if you join us over there. So thank you, Katie, and thank you, everybody. It's been a really interesting half an hour, and I hope everybody else has found it so as well. So thanks very much, and we'll wrap it up there. Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
everybody.